What if I told you some Seiko watches genuinely feel like luxury watches once they're on the wrist? Not good for the money, not decent for the price. I mean watches that actually look, feel, and wear far more expensive than most people expect from Seiko. Because once you start looking beyond the basic models, you find watches with incredible finishing, textured dials, sharp case designs, and details that honestly compete with watches at much higher price points. And that's where things get interesting. Because Seiko has quietly become one of the best brands at making watches that feel premium without forcing you into luxury-level prices. So the real question is, how expensive can a Seiko actually feel before people stop seeing it as just a Seiko? Well, in today's video, we're about to find out. Let's start with one that honestly doesn't even look like a normal Seiko anymore. This is probably one of the watches that changes people's opinion on Seiko the fastest. Because the moment you see the Presage sharp-edged series in person, it stops feeling like a typical Seiko and starts feeling much closer to a luxury dress sports watch. The first thing that stands out is the case design. The sharp angles, polished surfaces, and detailed finishing give the watch a much more refined and expensive appearance than most people expect from the brand. Under light, the case reflects beautifully and gives the watch a level of depth that feels genuinely premium. But honestly, the dial is what really steals attention here. Seiko uses traditional Japanese hemp leaf patterns on the dial, creating a textured surface that changes constantly depending on the lighting. Combined with the polished hands and markers, the watch has a level of detail that's difficult to fully appreciate until you see it on the wrist. Inside, you get a Seiko automatic movement, sapphire crystal, and strong overall build quality, making the watch feel solid beyond just the design alone. And despite looking this refined, it still keeps enough sportiness to work as an everyday watch instead of feeling too formal or fragile. That balance is exactly what makes this watch so impressive, because it manages to feel elegant, modern, and high-end without losing the practical side Seiko is known for. And once you realize watches from the sharp-edged series usually cost far less than most luxury sports watches they visually compete with, the value starts feeling seriously hard to ignore. This is easily one of the cleanest chronographs Seiko has made in recent years. The Seiko speed timer Panda has become extremely popular, but once you see it in person, you understand why people keep talking about it. The design immediately gives off that classic vintage racing chronograph feel. The white dial, black subdials, and red accents create a look that feels sporty, balanced, and much more expensive than what most people expect from a Seiko chronograph. One of the strongest parts of this watch is the proportions. Unlike many chronographs that feel too thick or oversized, the SSC 813 wears surprisingly well on the wrist. The case stays compact, clean, and comfortable while still keeping a strong presence. The finishing also plays a huge role in why the watch feels premium. The polished details, brushed surfaces, and sharp handset give the watch a much more refined appearance than typical quartz chronographs in this range. And despite the luxury-inspired look, it still keeps Seiko's practical side. The watch uses a solar-powered chronograph movement, meaning it charges using light and avoids the hassle of regular battery changes. You also get a sapphire crystal, strong lume, and solid everyday durability, making it a watch that works just as well daily as it does visually. And honestly, that's what makes the speed timer so impressive. Because it manages to combine vintage racing style, modern reliability, and a genuinely premium wrist presence in a way that feels far more expensive than people expect once they try it on. This is one of those Seiko watches that gets more impressive the longer you wear it. The baby alpinist doesn't try to look flashy or overly luxurious at first glance, but once you start noticing the details, it becomes very clear why so many watch enthusiasts love it. The green dial is probably the first thing that grabs attention. Under different lighting, it constantly changes shades, giving the watch a level of depth and character that feels much more premium than expected. Combined with the gold tone accents and cathedral-style hands, the watch has a very unique personality on the wrist. The case size also plays a huge role in why this watch feels so balanced. It wears comfortably, works with almost anything, and manages to feel sporty and elegant at the same time. And despite the refined look, this is still a true Prospex watch underneath. You get 200 meters of water resistance, sapphire crystal, automatic movement, and strong everyday durability, making it far more capable than a typical dress-oriented watch. One of the biggest reasons people love the Baby Alpinist is because it doesn't really fit into one category. It's part field watch, part everyday sports watch, and part dress watch all at the same time. And honestly, that versatility is what makes it feel expensive. Because instead of feeling like a watch designed only for one situation, it feels like a watch you could genuinely wear almost every day without getting bored of it. This is probably one of the most visually impressive watches Seiko has ever made for the price. Because the moment light hits the dial of the Presage cocktail time, it immediately starts feeling like a watch that should cost far more than it actually does. The entire concept behind this watch comes from Japanese cocktail bars, and honestly, you can see that inspiration instantly. The dial has a deep, sunburst texture that constantly changes depending on the angle and lighting, giving the watch a level of elegance that's very hard to find at this price point. The polished hands, applied markers, and clean case design make the watch feel refined without looking overly complicated. And despite being a dressier piece, it still has enough versatility to work casually too. Inside, you get a Seiko automatic movement and a transparent case back, which adds even more character, because you can actually see the mechanical movement working underneath. One of the biggest reasons this watch feels expensive is simply because of how much attention Seiko put into the visual details. The dial reflections, the finishing, and the overall balance of the watch give it a much more luxurious feel than most people expect once they try it on. And honestly, this is one of those watches that regularly makes people ask the same question. Wait, this is really a Seiko? This is the kind of Seiko that makes you realize how far the brand has evolved in recent years. The Prospex 1968 GMT doesn't just feel like a good Seiko dive watch. It genuinely feels like a luxury sports GMT once it's on the wrist. The first thing that stands out is the overall build quality. The case finishing, the bezel action, and the bracelet all feel extremely solid and refined. Everything has weight, precision, and that dense premium feeling you normally expect from watches at a much higher level. Visually, the watch has a strong presence without looking over-designed. The large markers, clean dial layout, and GMT hand give it that modern luxury tool watch vibe while still keeping the classic Seiko Prospex identity underneath. And because this is based on Seiko's famous 1968 diver design, the proportions feel balanced despite the sporty build. It wears much cleaner and more refined than many GMT dive watches in this category. You also get serious specs here, including a true automatic GMT movement, sapphire crystal, 200 meters of water resistance, and strong everyday durability, making it a watch built for actual long-term use instead of just appearance. But honestly, what makes this watch feel expensive is the overall experience. The finishing, the weight, the dial depth, and the way the watch reflects light all combine to create something that feels far more premium than what many people expect when they hear the word Seiko. And once it's on the wrist, it honestly becomes very easy to forget you're not wearing something much more expensive. This is one of those watches that quietly becomes more impressive the more you use it. The Seiko Solar Speed Timer doesn't try too hard to look flashy, but once it's on the wrist, it gives off a very clean and refined sports chronograph feel that honestly feels more expensive than people expect. The design is simple, balanced, and extremely wearable. The dial stays easy to read, the subdials are well positioned, and the overall layout feels inspired by classic racing chronographs without looking outdated. One of the strongest things about this watch is how practical it is for daily wear, because unlike many automatic chronographs that become thick or complicated, this one uses Seiko's solar-powered movement, which keeps the watch reliable, accurate, and easy to live with long-term. The finishing also deserves attention. The mix of brushed and polished surfaces, combined with the sharp handset and detailed dial, gives the watch a much more premium look than most quartz chronographs in this category. You also get features like a sapphire crystal, solid water resistance, and strong overall durability, making it feel like a serious everyday sports watch instead of just a stylish accessory. And honestly, that's why this watch works so well, because it combines sporty design, everyday practicality, and premium-looking details in a way that makes the entire experience feel much more refined than the price suggests. And honestly, this might be the watch that surprises people the most on the entire list, Because once you see the Seiko Prospex LX line in person, it becomes very hard to keep thinking of Seiko as just a mid-range watch brand. This feels like a serious luxury sports watch in almost every way. The first thing you notice is the finishing. The case uses Seiko's Zaratsu polishing technique, creating incredibly sharp reflections and smooth surfaces that give the watch a level of refinement normally associated with much more expensive luxury brands. The design also feels far more premium and modern than what most people expect from a Prospex watch. The titanium construction keeps it lightweight on the wrist, but at the same time, it still feels solid and high quality. And despite the luxury feel, this is still a true tool watch underneath. You get strong water resistance, high legibility, durable construction, and a design inspired by Seiko's long history of professional dive and sports watches. Depending on the model, the LX line also uses Seiko's spring drive technology, which is honestly one of the smoothest and most impressive movements Seiko has ever created. Watching that seconds hand glide across the dial almost feels unreal in person. But honestly, what makes the LX line special is the overall experience. The finishing, the movement, the comfort, and the attention to detail all combine to create a watch that feels far beyond what most people imagine when they hear the name Seiko. And that's exactly why it's the perfect watch to end this list with. Because these watches prove something a lot of people still underestimate. Seiko can make watches that feel genuinely luxurious when they really want to.